Do you remember why the people died?
What was it called? It was not. It was a drug. I forgot.
It prevented us from
Cyanide.
right. Cyanide kill it. It bonded with one of the enzymes that releases the electrons to oxygen and produces water. Right. So when that happened, we couldn't give the electrons to oxygen. Therefore, the electron transport chain backed up, and the NADH couldn't be oxidized to go back and be reused. So if we run out of NADH, the rest of cellular respiration cannot occur because there's no NAD to reduce. Does that make sense? Do we remember that? All right, so today we're talking about something called anaerobic respiration. This is going to take me 3 minutes to explain to you. It's actually really interesting. So anaerobic, what's that word mean? Does anyone know? What are we lacking? No oxygen. Okay, but in this case, it can also represent no mitochondria as well. So if there's mitochondrial damage, but there's no oxygen. So normally we have glucose, it becomes pyruvate, we make NADH, we make 2-ATP, we go into the mitochondria, we do our thing, we get 36 ATP, right? So what we're saying is what happens if this pathway is not available? Okay? What do organisms do? And so what we're going to talk about is what animals and bacteria do. And you guys, if you're athletes, you're going to especially be able to relate to this. And then we're going to talk about what yeast do and how alcohol is made. So if this pathway is unavailable for some reason, whether there's not enough oxygen, there's not enough mitochondria, and if you have sprinters or weightlifters in here, you're going to be able to, or people who exercise regularly, right? So what ends up happening, the first thing is called, let me use a better one of these. It's lactic acid. Has anyone heard of lactic acid before? Lactic acid fermentation. So this occurs in animals. This is one of the things that can happen. What has to happen is that we need more ATP. So the body's got to figure out a way to get this ATP. So during glycolysis, we have our NADHs made, right? And the reason why this is going to stop is because what do we need? We need NAD. So what ends up happening is NADH will then donate its electrons to the lactic acid. And once NADH does that, now what is it? It's NAD again. So glycolysis can occur. 2-ATP can be produced. Does that make sense? So is it as good as if oxygen is present? Not at all. But it can give you that quick burst. So our sprinters, our weightlifters, our athletes, lactic acid fermentation causes muscle soreness. Because what happens is during your workout, when you work out, if you're doing it right, you should be working out a little harder every single time, pushing your muscles. But it also means that maybe there's not enough mitochondria. Or maybe if you're weightlifting, has anyone ever weightlifted? Do you breathe heavy when you weightlift? Do you breathe heavy compared to when you're running? Think about running versus weightlifting. Is weightlifting an aerobic exercise? It's not, right? So what ends up happening is there's not enough oxygen in your muscle cells, and you go into glycolysis because your body is trying to produce more ATP for you to be able to lift those weights. Has anyone had coaches that like to punish you by doing wall sits or planks? What ends up happening eventually?
Good morning. I'm sorry for the interruption. Could all of the travelers on the Eastern Europe trip please report
I'm recording
to the
this for
library
you,
at this
so.
time? Thank you.
Okay. What happens eventually? Can you keep doing it forever?
No.
No, your muscles give out, right? And then what do you feel? What do you feel? When you're working really hard and you're working those muscles, do you feel a burn? You feel a burn. That's lactic acid. That's what happens when your body's trying to produce ATP quickly for you, okay? So kids who are gone, we'll catch you up tomorrow, okay? All right, the second one we're going to talk about, it happens in yeast. And it's alcoholic fermentation. So this is the process that makes beer and wine. Are you guys with me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the same situation occurs. Yeast can do cellular respiration or fermentation. So NADH needs to give its electrons to something. Guys, it donates its electrons to ethyl alcohol and produces alcohol. It also produces carbon dioxide as a side effect or as a byproduct. So when yeast needs to continue making ATP when they run out of oxygen, they just go into fermentation, and that's how beer and wine is made. Okay? Yes.
Isn't that yeast used to like rise bread?
Yes.
Or, like,
This is why
for,
carbon
like,
dioxide gets produced.
carbon dioxide?
So if you can do it in an anaerobic or aerobic situation, but you can actually. Has anyone had made bread before, or smelled dough when it's rising? Have you ever recognized the smell? The smell is there's a little bit of alcohol that gets produced, right? So does anyone know anyone that's made beer and wine before? You have this cool little contraption, right, where you put yeast with sugar and whatever else you want to throw in there, and you put a little cap on it with water in it. Carbon dioxide can escape, no oxygen can get in. What ends up happening is that you make alcohol. It's really kind of a cool process. But